Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. This is the 101st episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe to it for a premium membership. Get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also file columns 3 times a week for the Boston Sports Journal, so go to bostonsportsjournal.com and check out all of that stuff, all the Bruins writing I do over there. With me today, I have the New England Hockey Journal's Mark Divver and an old friend making his Pucks with Haggs, this version of the Pucks with Haggs podcast debut, Jimmy Murphy. James, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
Yeah, so no longer with Boston Hockey now, but you can still find me on the Eye Test podcast on the Sick Media Network with Pierre McGuire. And then I'm also just joined Substack myself, Joe. So you can go to Murphy's Hockey Law on Substack and find me there as well for the time being. Some stuff in the works, and when it arises, I will let everyone know.
That's awesome. All right, well, welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, Murph. We're glad to have you. All right, let's get into it. Just thoughts, Mark, let's start with you. Thoughts from where we are in the Stanley Cup Final. Florida looked exhausted. Florida looked tired. Florida looked like they were kind of mailing in that Game 6 a little bit. I don't know if they were saving it all up for Game 7, if they just didn't have anything in the tank, or if they're just like on the really wrong side of the momentum right now. But they didn't feel to me like they brought much to the table in that Game 6 in Edmonton, and now we go to a Game 7 in Florida, which I still think Florida is going to win in Game 7. I know it's not trending that way right now. But I think that's what's going to happen. Just your thoughts on where we are in the Stanley Cup Final.
Well, going from a 3-0 series to now a 3-3 series, it's the last 3 games have been tremendous. I mean, if you're a hockey fan, it's been great to watch.
I thought Game 5 was awesome. That was one of the funnest hockey games I've seen in a long time.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And but I don't know. Yeah, Florida could surprise some people and win the next game, but how do you reel it back in? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how good of a coach Paul Maurice is over the next couple of days. Just the momentum is it's all going in Edmonton's favor, and Bobrovsky doesn't look like the same guy he was certainly against the Bruins. Or early in this series. So, somebody said the plane ride, today is like the worst plane ride in hockey history for the Panthers, and I have to agree with that. So, I mean, I don't know how they find their way out of this. I really don't.
No, I mean, it's trending right now, and the momentum is all going towards Edmonton just pulling it out in Game 7, and Connor McDavid probably pulling out some kind of MVP superstar performance, something that where he's going to rise to the occasion and meet the moment and make sure the Oilers win. Like, you could see that definitely happening. But I also think when you watch enough hockey playoffs and you watch enough of the Stanley Cup playoffs, especially when teams are coming back from 3-0 and the amount of energy that they have to expend to get back from 3-0 to tie the series, especially at the end of a long 2 months where they've been, in the playoff gauntlet for a long time. Sometimes we see those teams push to a Game 7, but then they've got absolutely nothing in the tank when Game 7 starts. And it's just clear that they're just out of gas. And, I feel like we could see that in Game 7 where Edmonton has pushed all the way that they have, and maybe they're, the tank's going to be on E when they get to Game 7, especially. But it's weird and counterintuitive to say that because it really looked like Florida's tank was on E in Game 6. But I feel like we might see that. I still think Florida's the better team. Obviously, they did not play well in Game 6. I expect to see the best that they have to offer in Game 7. And I've seen them play too well over the last few postseasons to think they're not going to bring their best in Game 7. But to your point, like, it feels like it's Edmonton's series to lose right now. Murph, your thoughts on the Stanley Cup Final?
Well, I think it's been a lot of irony in the last few games as Edmonton's come back in this. One thing I've been looking at is just the tide has turned in faceoffs. Florida was dominating not just the Oilers in the first 3 games of this series, but all teams they played in the playoffs. We saw how dominant they were against the Bruins in that 6-game series. So that's something I noticed that Edmonton's now taken that's gone in Edmonton's favor. And then the other thing too, guys, I think Paul Coffey, Mark Stewart. Running the defense there, Mark Stewart specifically the penalty kill, which who would have thought that would become the Oilers' bread and butter in this playoff? I think that's really ironic. But I think Paul Coffey deserves a lot of credit for figuring out how to get them and be making those first outlet passes and breaking through that neutral zone coverage that Florida has been so dominant with. And then I got to give a lot of credit to Stuart Skinner, guys. I mean, you look back at each of these wins in this series with his team facing elimination. Now, you always say, what do you need when you're in an elimination game? You could go home if you lose. You need some big saves early on, right, from your goalie to get your team into it, to know that you're behind them, they can depend on you. And he's given them that, and they fed off it. So I know he's not the most glamorous goalie, and he's not in Bobrovsky's category. I get it. But I think he deserves a lot of credit for helping them get back into the series.
Yeah, and to your point, that stretch pass has really neutralized the Florida forecheck, and they've been able to just throw home run passes that, like in the last few games, it's turned into the Panthers giving up tons of odd man rushes, tons of great chances, and part of that is just the strategy of the stretch pass, and part of that is because Edmonton has so many players forwards that can make you pay when they're on the receiving end of the stretch pass and can finish off those plays. They're a dangerous team that can make that strategy hurt the other team and make the Panthers pay when they're over aggressive. So it's been really interesting to watch all of that. At this point, is it almost a fait accompli that win or lose in Game 7, Murph, that Connor McDavid wins the Conn Smythe?
I think you have to give it to him. I mean, let's see what he does in Game 7. Another thing I should note, too, guys, I think that we have to look at last night, and a great job by Knobloch to do this, as it went on, and maybe he realized, I would say pretty much after that Florida, that Barkov goal was called back on the offsides challenge, which I know you probably want to get into in a bit, but they limited the time for, McDavid and Draisaitl. He was able to reel them in a bit. And I mean, McDavid only had 18:58. Now, he didn't register a shot or a point, but he's going to be well rested for Game 7, as is Draisaitl, who, didn't have his usual workload as well. So, yeah, I think McDavid comes out. He has a hell of a game, and I think win or lose, he's going to get the Conn Smythe.
Yeah, and honestly, I took the position before Game 6 that the Oilers were only going to win Stanley Cup Final games as long as McDavid was going nuts and having superstar performances, and that didn't happen in Game 6. Adam Henrique and other guys stepped up and filled in and showed that it's a team effort and that they do have other players that can step up in the moment and help them. Mark, what you sort of on that train of thought that McDavid is going to win the Conn Smythe here, no matter what happens, just based on his whole body work in the playoffs and the way he in a lot of ways was instrumental in this turnaround for Edmonton, obviously with a couple of all-time performances to get wins for the Oilers.
Yeah, I would agree with McDavid, with the caveat that if Bobrovsky makes, 45, 50 saves on Monday night, maybe that changes the vote. But I'd go with McDavid for sure. He's just been a performance befitting the superstar that he is.
Are we predicting 45 save shutout performance for Bobrovsky, Mark? Is that what we're doing right now?
No, I don't make predictions, Joe. You know that.
We're in the analysis business. We have all the answers after the fact.
After the fact, absolutely.
I mean, Murph, we could get into the Barkov goal getting overturned, the offsides review. If you guys want to talk about it or you have on it, go for it. But look,
it needs to be changed. Bottom line, but we are where we are. We can't do anything about it now, right?
I guess it was the right call, by a millimeter or a millisecond. But I hate that something that close gets overturned, especially in a moment like that, in a game like that. It really changes the whole game when it's going to be a 2-1 game. Barkov scores, Florida kind of steals back the momentum a little bit. Who knows where it would have gone after that? But for that to happen on that play where it's just like barely offside, if at all, that I don't know. I would rather see less review rather than more review.
I agree. I mean, I'm sure Mark does as well. I just think it is where it is, and I think it's something you need to reevaluate going forward. I don't know how much change we're going to see between now and next season, because I've seen some insiders tweet that there's not much of an appetite from GMs right now, which I find crazy, but for things to change. But we'll see. We'll see.
Well, like once you open the door to technology, it's tough to close it, because I'm technically they do get the calls right, depending on how, the interpretation of the video or the rules or whatever. But most of the time it's the right call, Mark, and it's hard to argue with that, even if it slows the game up, takes some of the human error that's always been a part of the game out of it with the referees, especially in a bang play like that. There are just times I wish we could go back to the way it was before the reviews started.
Yeah, I hate it. We all watched hockey for decades, and never really thinking, geez, look at all the offsides they're missing, and it just you just accepted it, and now to have that long wait, they score the goal, there's a long wait while they review. It takes away from the momentum of the game. It just puts a damper on it for me. We're stuck with it for now, and that's that. But I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, guys, one thing Pierre McGuire on our podcast a lot will say that, he's saying all the time, if the puck touches the blue line on the entry, then it's in the zone, and that would reduce the millimeter reviews. So maybe they can alter it a bit that way. I don't know how much they're going to drastically change it, but I'm with you guys too. And I think it's ironic. I mean, the more technology we introduce, the more of a bleep show things become. And, I'd like to see it go back to basics a bit.
Definitely. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. Some great features on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesday to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. It's fun and pretty simple. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. But moving on from the Stanley Cup Final, there's actually some Bruins news percolating. This is maybe we're going to get into the prediction business right now, because none of it has happened yet. But this was a big week for goalie movement. Darcy Kemper gets traded out to the LA Kings for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Good luck, Washington Capitals, dealing with Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's been a severe problem child and an underperformer everywhere he's been, and has been kind of swiftly kicked in the butt out of every market that he's been in with every team that he's been in. Kind of teams have washed their hands with him. Maybe he's trying to shoot his way out of every NHL market until he finally gets to Montreal, where he wants to be. I don't know what he's doing there. But that's one of the trades. And it makes it interesting to wonder if there was discussions about Pierre-Luc Dubois and Linus Ullmark, if that was the Kings-Bruins trade that was, broached at the trade deadline or discussed in any way, shape, or form. And we also had the New Jersey Devils trading for Jacob Markstrom from the Calgary Flames. So basically now it really leaves, in my opinion, the Ottawa Senators as the only team that would be a logical trade partner for Linus Ullmark. I remember going on Ottawa radio in the middle of last year, and they were asking me all kinds of questions about Linus Ullmark. I think they have been viewing this as a target and as a player they really want for a long time now. And it looks like it could happen. Certainly there's a lot of rumors out there about it. And whether, Alfredson has convinced Linus Ullmark to waive his no trade, if there's a contract extension involved before he's going to agree to go, what they're going to be able to get from Ottawa. Is Jacob Chychrun involved? Is one of their first round picks involved? How much of a haul is Don Sweeney going to get for Linus Ullmark? I'll open it up to both of you guys. Mark, I guess you first. Anything that you guys have heard one way or the other, a feeling that you have what is going to happen here, and whether this is going to kind of be a done deal. And also, I will tip the hat to you, Mark. I think you reported, what was it, yesterday, that the Bruins and Brandon Bussey are working on a contract extension, which would also play right into locking him up before you trade Linus Ullmark away, so you have your backup goaltender all set to go when you pull the trigger on the deal.
Yeah, well, as far as that goes, Brandon Bussey, he has no leverage. He's a restricted free agent. He's pretty much got to take what they're offering, which will be close to the league minimum as a guy who's never played a game in the league, and that's fine. That's fine. Yep. But
that'll go well with the mammoth contract that Jeremy Swayman's going to sign when they finally sign him to it.
That's true. That's true. Every penny counts, right?
Yes.
But as far as Ullmark, I don't have any insight or sources as to what's going to happen. Something's going to happen. We got that deadline coming up. Is it the last week, the last day of the month? Mm-hmm. They owe him $1 million. The Bruins do, if he's still with them. So I got to think that something's going to happen by then. They're not going to want to pay. Here's $1 million. Now go to. Now you're not going to play for us anymore. I don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
Great point.
But it's the handwriting appears to be on the wall here in both Boston and in Ottawa. I think Don Sweeney, even though he may protest that he doesn't have a problem with keeping the two goalie tandem. Ideally, they would trade Ullmark and get some assets in return.
Yeah,
and Swayman steps in as the starter. And on the flip side, Steve Staios, a first-time GM in Ottawa, he's got to get this right. He can't make a bad deal or what's perceived to be a bad deal. Mm-hmm. He needs to fix his goaltending situation, and Ullmark would be just the guy to do it, in my opinion. As far as getting a haul, I don't know. I feel like they're going to get less than maybe I don't know. People might think.
Well, put it this way: do you think they would get less than what Calgary got for Markstrom?
Geez, I hope not, because I don't think Calgary got that much.
Yeah. But, they got their first-round pick, though, right? They got the 10th overall pick.
They did, and if Boston could get a first-round pick, especially, I have my doubts that they're going to give him one that's in the top 10, right, like this year. But a first-rounder, the guy I would love to see, and I'm probably it's too much of a reach, probably is Shane Pinto. If they could get him in return, that solves, at least partially solves Boston's center deficiency. You still got to go out, I think, and sign one in free agency. A top line guy.
Yep.
But I'd love to have Shane Pinto. I suspect the Bruins would feel that way. But I think I saw early, some speculation that maybe a first rounder, a roster player, and maybe a prospect. I don't think they're getting that much, but I could be wrong. But I think it's sometime between now and the last day of this month. I think it seems pretty apparent that something's going to happen on that front. So
yeah, I agree. I think it does. The writing does seem to be on the wall, especially with the reports out there from multiple places that he would waive his no trade to go to Ottawa. It's gotten to that point. I think once that happens, and once they've kind of, at least in part, agreed to, whatever the return's going to be, then it becomes, are you going to work out an extension beforehand, like all those other details? But it seems like some of the principal stuff that has already been sort of hammered out, or at least they're in lockstep to some degree with. Murph, your thoughts on this? And in my opinion, I think it makes sense. I think, like I said before, I think this is the only place they could trade him to now. I don't think there are many other teams that are really desperate for goaltending where they're going to give up a lot in exchange for them right now. We're talking about a team in Ottawa that was 30th out of 31 teams, or 31st out of 32 teams in save percentage. Was it Anton Forsberg and the guy that came from Columbus?
No, they had Bogard, and then they had Corpusella.
Corpusalo, yes.
That's the guy I think of. Yeah.
He was not. They were terrible. The both of them. They need somebody in there can actually stop pucks, and it submarines their entire talented young core group. Where they've got a lot of talent on that team. They've got good pieces they're putting together, and people had predicted that they were actually going to be a breakout team last year, and their goaltending completely submarined them. So they are very desperate for goaltending help. I just wonder, and I had heard Pinto, the name that you mentioned, Divver, Mark, as somebody that Bruins might be interested in or might be changing hands. But like the other name you hear a lot is Jacob Chychrun, which would be interesting. I think that would really solidify the Bruins' top four if that kind of guy came to Boston in that trade.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, this based on what I've heard, guys, I think the only other team that is of recently, within the last few days to a week, that was interested was Detroit. But I think they got the sense, from what I'm told, that they were not really liking what Ullmark is looking for in an extension right now, because they've got Sebastian Cossa coming soon, and they're looking to him in the future, but they wanted to get a guy, I think, for 1 year here who could maybe assure. They're kind of like in a spot that Ottawa's in, right? Everyone looked at them as a breakout team as well that would make the playoffs potentially. They didn't. So they want to make sure that they can secure that playoff spot this year, and I think that was the idea in bringing Ullmark in there if they could, but it doesn't look like that will happen. As for Ottawa, I'm with you. I mean, for all the reasons you said there, it makes sense for them. This is a team that I think it's playoffs or bust in that market right now because, you know, guys, we've seen, they're not the only team that's done this, but we've seen teams when they're trying to win their market back, win their fans back, sometimes they maybe build expectations too high. And I think that's what happened with Ottawa there, and they got burned by it. I think, you guys brought up Pinto too. Let's not forget how many games, he was out for a quarter of a season with that suspension. That hurt them as well. So there are a lot of things that it was like a perfect storm of everything happening, or Murphy's Law, so to speak, that went wrong for Ottawa last year. So I think they want to make sure that they can get over the hump now and make the playoffs with that talented roster in front of their goalie. As for the return, guys, I'm with you, Joe. I agree with you, Mark. I think Pinto would be great, and I know the Bruins have been interested in him. I just don't know if Ottawa budges on that. I think they want to keep him. They see him as part of their future. But Chychrun, I know, has been out there for a year, even dating back to last offseason. They were poking around, seeing if there was interest in him. So I think that makes a lot more sense right now, and I'm with you, Joe. I think it secures the top four there. You maybe can move him next to Carlo and slide Lindholm in with McAvoy or vice versa. So it gives you a lot of versatility, I think, that you didn't have on the left side.
And people still forget, he's just 26 years old, Chychrun. It seems like he's been around forever.
Yeah.
Because he came into the league like at 18, 19. He was pretty young when he broke into the NHL. And I remember he dropped in that initial draft when everybody thought he was going to be like top 10, and I think he dropped out of the top 10. But very talented player, obviously can move the puck and offensively can do some things. He definitely was one of the players that paid the price for the bad goaltending last year when you look at the plus minus, and he's been on bad teams for most of his NHL career, so that's going to color some of the numbers that he has. I know there was definitely interest, obviously, when Bruce Cassidy was the coach in the Bruins, because there's history between Butchie and Chychrun's dad. But I still think I think that's a player that the Bruins have had some level of interest in for a long time. So it would be interesting if that kind of thing materializes when and if the Ullmark deal gets done. I do like the what you mentioned, Mark, about the money at the end of the month. I hadn't even thought about that or
that's a great point.
Even looked into that. It makes sense anyway. I think they'd want to get the deal done if they're going to trade him before July 1st anyway, just to have cost certainty as to how much they're going to be able to spend come free agency time. Looking ahead to July 1st and to free agency, Mark, any free agents or anybody with the Bruins that you get a strong sense is going to return, or somebody out there that you think they really like that they want to bring in?
I don't. I haven't heard anything about Jake DeBrusk or in weeks. I don't think. I
saw some things about Toronto and DeBrusk having mutual interest in each other.
But as far as the Bruins,
yes,
I think Jake's going to the market as we expected. So I don't know. The center in Vancouver that they were they had eyes for during the season. I would expect him to be a top target. And I don't know what his expectation would be as far as an extension, as far as a contract. $7 million a year, $8 million a year. I don't know. I think he's gonna command a high price.
Maybe it'll be a little reduced since he did not have a great season. The year that he had this year between Calgary and Ottawa and Vancouver was not good. So maybe that lowers a little just because he's not coming off like his 40 goal, 82 points or whatever it was he did with Calgary a couple of years ago. But he did have a good playoff, and like centers are always going to get paid, the top guys anyway.
I've mentioned before that I think Brady Shea would be a good
I like him.
Bruin. Yep. But if they get Chychrun, then you got too many D. Somebody's maybe going to have to go out the door in that case, and maybe that opens up other trade possibilities. Although I don't know who that would be. Who would they be? Who would they be willing to trade at this point? That's on the D. I don't think there's a lot of candidates that they'd want to unload. But
no,
I've always liked his game. And then I think it'll be Don Sweeney and the Bruins doing kind of what they do a lot of times, which is sign guys that maybe you never even thought of as free agents. Guys that you didn't expect or know that they had interest in. So I would look to be surprised on July 1 with maybe not top line guys in that category, but depth guys, second line type guys. That's I won't be surprised if that's how it pans out, but who knows?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I would probably be a little disappointed if that's the way it goes, like standard operating procedure for Don Sweeney and the management group, because they have so much cap space and money. I would hope they shoot higher than that instead of the diamond in the rough guys. That admittedly, they hit on those guys. They do a really good job with those guys, but I also feel like on some level, when you continuously do that year over year, you have a team full of third line forwards. And I think if they get their top line center, then maybe they can. That gives them a little bit of wiggle room to sign a guy or two that fits into that kind of dark horse category. Especially if they lose DeBrusk. You know what I mean? I think they need to spend to get another sort of primary scoring guy in here. If Jake DeBrusk is gone, which I think we all kind of think that's going to happen. I'm not going to be surprised at all if he signs with a Canadian market, whether it's Toronto or he goes out west closer to where his dad and his family are. Like, I feel like the Canadian teams covet him, and maybe it's because he's NHL, second generation, and his dad's in the broadcasting business, whatever. But he seems to carry a lot of value with a lot of those teams, even beyond his obvious skills. So I just think some team's going to spend a lot of money for him and maybe regret it just because his consistency. If you give him 6-7 years at a big dollar amount, I don't love the consistency being there for him. I don't love the day-to-day concentration and focus and dedication being there for him if you give him that kind of money. I think the Bruins knew that. I think that's part of the reason he's not coming back.
The first time he hits a 12 or a 15 game stretch without a goal, then those teams will be asking themselves, what were we thinking?
Yes. Yeah. Murph, free agency coming up. Anybody you feel strongly about, either incumbent players that you think are definitely going to be back, or free agents that you think may get targeted by the Bruins?
Well, guys, I look at this. I agree. Let's say they get Chychrun here, or they fill that left defense spot they want to, and so they're using free agency to find a center. I look at the list there, and I'm not that impressed. I don't see, other than Lindholm, a guy that really jumps out to me that has the potential to come in and be that star number one center that you want. I think that's going to be done through a trade somehow. I think Don Sweeney over the course of his tenure here in Boston as GM, he's done a lot better in trades than he has in signings. And going back to what Mark said, so
especially big money signings, Murph. Absolutely,
exactly.
I agree.
Yeah. So let's say going back to what Mark said, where maybe they do they use free agency to plug in holes, so to speak, on more 1-year deals and do what they did last year. Maybe they get that center through a trade, and then they still have a little money left over to sprinkle in those guys that Mark's alluding to there on 1-year deals. But one guy I wonder if they take a chance on. I know he's old. I know he's at the end of his career, but he, once he got healthy and he got on a little roll there in Detroit, is Patrick Kane. I mean, they've had interest in him before. If DeBrusk leaves, you bring him in on a 1-year deal to add some scoring. Who knows? So I'd be interested to see if they circle back on him.
Wouldn't that be something? That would, I think, that would excite the fan base,
right? Even if it's a 1-year deal, it's a kind of lots of bonuses or something. Who knows?
Well, and I think that's like a primary scoring kind of guy too. You could say he could come in and make, he makes things happen. He drives lines, drives shifts when he's out there, makes other players better.
Experience,
Yeah. So my concern with the Bruins, and this was what I saw with the roster last year, is when you did the exercise of how many first line players do you see on that forward group? How many second line players do you see in that forward group?
Yeah.
How many third line players do you see in that forward group, or bottom six forwards?
Yeah.
There were a lot of bottom six, third line kind of forwards in that group. More than six, more than
they were
three.
playing above their potential a lot, And we saw what happened in the playoffs where they came back to reality and kind of everything evened off. So,
and I would definitely put Patrick Kane, even at his elder state now, in a top six position, or capable of it anyway, especially as he gets removed from the hip surgery that he had, and presumably could be even better, next year, this coming year, than he was last year when he was first coming back from the surgery. So I think that's interesting. Anything else cooking, Murph, as far as the Bruins go? Anything that you have on the radar right now?
Well, I mean, I think one thing, guys, that obviously we know they want is to get back in the first round, and I don't know if they're able to do that in this Ullmark trade. If they can't, does Sweeney find another way to do that? I think that's a big goal for them. And, okay, let's say he doesn't do it for this draft. He wants to do it for next year. Like, he wants to start to get more first-round picks and build them. So I'm interested to see between now and when he speaks to the media next Thursday in Vegas if he's acquired a first-round pick, whether it's this year or next year.
Mark, anything else as far as on your mind, or at the front as far as the Bruins go heading into the draft next week and free agency on July 1?
Well, Murph raises a good point about getting in the first round. I wonder if even a second-round pick this year, they don't even have one, right? Obviously,
they don't pick to the fourth, I believe.
Yeah, till the fourth. Yeah. That's right. They do have to beef up the prospect pool. There's no question about it. They don't have guys that are going to be NHL ready in the near future, and so getting a draft pick, even a second rounder, they'd be better off than not picking in the second. And I don't know what the price would be for that. I really have no idea. But I think the goalie situation obviously is probably taken up a lot of Don Sweeney's time at this point, and whether other things like signing other players takes a back seat until that is straightened out. I guess we'll see over between now and the draft.
Mark, got to ask you a Providence Bruins question here. In discussing DeBrusk, talking about him and potentially moving on, I think we see that sort of reading the tea leaves. That's most likely outcome here, is that he's going to sign somewhere else and go for bigger money, bigger term, probably elsewhere. Is Fabian Lysell, a guy that the Bruins could or should view as an in-house candidate to potentially be a top 6 guy next year? Is that something that you think would be possible, or too much to ask based on what we saw out of him and the progressions we saw out of him last year in Providence, where obviously there was some, ups and downs, but it seemed like it was on a bit of a positive trajectory towards the end of the year?
Well, I think asking him to be a top 6 forward next year is, a bridge too far for him. I think, starting him lower in the lineup, I think that's the way to go.
Yep.
But I think it's time. It's time to find out with him.
Yeah.
Exactly where do we stand? He's got 2 years pro under his belt. The results have been, good at times, not so good at other times, like a lot of young players. But I think it's time to, give him a shot and see what happens. And then you'll have a better idea, where he might fit down the road. I think ideally he's a top 6 forward down the road, but whether that fits with the reality, remains to be seen. I think he certainly has, tremendous speed and a lot of skill, but all the parts of his game have to fit together. And to this point, they don't right now. So I think training camp will be interesting to see, what do they do? They're not going to come out and say, okay, this guy's got a job on the NHL roster, but
no, they never do that.
No, they're not going to do that. But is that, does he make the team as a bottom 6 guy to start? That wouldn't surprise me. And like I said, I think it's time to find out. If you plug him in there on the third or the fourth line and he falls on his face, okay, that's one thing. But if you plug him in there and he starts to get it, that, okay, this is what you have to do if you want to be an NHL player. This is where you start. They got a guy in the room in Brad Marchand who started on the 4th line, right? 20 games without a point in his first 20 games. There's a guy that can. I'm not saying Marshy's going to mentor this kid. I'm not saying that at all. But there's someone there that to look to that realized that he had to adapt his game to make it, and I think Lysell is going to have to adapt his game. He's not going to be Brad Marchand, but he certainly has the potential to be a skilled scoring forward, and I think it's time to find out where does he stand. So that'll be something a storyline to look forward to in training camp, no question.
I still remember that stretch that you're talking about of 1 goal in 20 games when I think right before he got called up, he and Vladimir Sobotka got into like a huge brawl down in Providence.
Yeah.
Like
the one thing I remember about that is he finally scored, and the next day I was at practice and I said to somebody, like, hey, did you see Marshy got his first goal last night? And the guy, I'm not going to say who responded, but the answer was, Jesus, it's about freaking time. That was the answer. So, everyone, you got to start somewhere. Everyone starts at some point, and I think it's time with Lysell to see where's he stand.
Mark, did you think, we know the coaching staff challenged him like halfway through the season there, right? And said he needed to play more of a 2-way game, buy in and all that. Did you get the feel at the end of the year that they had felt that he had done that better, so to speak?
I think they did, and I think he did. I think his play picked up after that. The injury that he had when he fell into the boards, and had kept him out for a long time. I think he would have played NHL games. Yeah. By the end of the season.
Yeah.
I think they would have brought him up just to see. But that set him back. And then he was only able to come back for 1 playoff game. Mm-hmm. And then he sat out the last game, which I think was was a disappointment to them that he didn't kind of suck it up and play through the injury, but he didn't. And now he heads into training camp next season, and it's I'm sure he was disappointed to not have the opportunity to get his first NHL game or two in at the end last season, but I think that opportunity is coming, as soon as October of this year. So,
yeah, well, it will be interesting. I can say Fabian Lysell, I'm not sure, has had the best training camps with the Bruins since he's come into the organization. So he's going to have to sort of change that sort of pattern and what's happened there in the last couple of years. I feel like his camps have not been great. So like maybe with a little more on the line and being that close, it'll be a different story this time around. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. Murph and Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And everybody else out there, thanks for listening. We'll see you at the rink.